Hello and welcome back to Small Soldier. In today's video, I'll show you how I painted this one-of-a-kind, hand-sculpted, ancient ruins diorama.
What are you going to do now, wizard? Oh, no! Oh, no! That'll do it.
Hello there and welcome back. As with all projects, you need to start somewhere. And for me, that's some useful reference material. The best way is to photograph your subject matter in the proper lighting situation. This will make it easier for us to follow where the highlights and shadows will fall. And this is the completed scene before paint. So let's take a look now how I weathered and painted this piece. And for reference, here's how the painted model looks on the unfinished base. Of course, you always want to protect your base so it doesn't get paint on it, and the best way to do that is with some good old masking tape. My favorite for this task is painter's tape. It's low tack, yet keeps the paint from seeping under the edges. These two colors will be the foundation for my pre-shade. Now, you don't necessarily need an airbrush for this part. You can do it with a rattle can. The only thing is, with an airbrush, you're going to have a lot more control of how much paint you lay down and where you lay it down. You can also create this effect with a brush just by laying down a dark base color, let's say with a rattle can, and then you can do a dry brush over top, indicating where your light is coming from. The next step is to spray the lighter colors. For the most part, I try and spray this at the direction my light source is coming from. To add a little extra punch to the highlights, I'll add 50% white to the base coat. And this I'll apply to those areas that have the most light exposure. Next up, I'll apply some good old-fashioned retro dry brushing.
Oh, man. Don't hit me with them negative waves so early in the morning.
And despite a lot of the negative connotations of this particular technique, I really think it's making a comeback, and if used correctly, it can be very effective. After the dry brushing had a few minutes to dry, I applied a liberal coat of Agrax Earthshade.
Nice.
I thought the shadows needed a cooler feel, so I added a dark blue-green filter to help achieve this effect. If you're wondering what the difference between a filter and a glaze is, well, I made a video all about that, and I'll link it in the description below. Here I'm adding some wet blending to get a smoother transition. I then used an undiluted version of the same paint for the deepest shadows. Before we continue, as you can see, only a fraction of you are subscribed to my channel. So, go ahead and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can always unsubscribe later.
But you might want to reconsider.
Come on, don't be like that.
What do you mean, don't be like that?
When dry brushing, it's probably a good idea to have a variety of different types of brushes. The brush I'm using here is a makeup brush. It came in a set of 3 and was really quite inexpensive. They're excellent for dry brushing or creating subtle effects. You've probably noticed that I've been going back and forth between techniques, adding washes, filters, dry brushing, more washes, more dry brushing, more filters. Well, that's because I'm trying to create a lot of depth, and the only way to do that is with multiple layers. Something else I try to be conscious of when I'm dry brushing is to dry brush in the direction of the light source. Acrylic paints are great, but I really find that using oils can really enhance the look of those acrylic paints. If you're wondering why I have the oil paint on a piece of cardboard, that's just to wick out the excess oil so that the paint will dry to a more matte finish. If your oil work is drying to a glossy finish, well, that might just be the problem right there. Try putting your oils on a piece of cardboard for about 10 minutes and that should solve the problem. You can also try the AK matte thinner. I found that really helps as well. Here you can see the effect of adding a glaze over top of the acrylic paint. I'm trying to achieve the look of an early morning sunrise, and by adding this cadmium yellow, I feel that it really enhances that look. By adding indigo, I can reduce the look of that yellowness and give it more of a natural feel. I'm also trying to establish some of the shadows in the ground where rocks might cast a shadow or where cast shadows might occur. Payne's Gray really helps build on the shadows I've created already and enhances that cool feel that I'm trying to capture. If it's not obvious to you already, you can really see how using oils allows what you've painted previously to still show through. And that's what I mean by creating depth. Each layer builds on the previous one, and by using different colors, you can alter or change the look of the previous colors below, just like you see here. Just like painting on a canvas, you need to use dark to push things back and light to bring things forward. Well, three-dimensional painting is really no exception. When you use a dark color, that implies that something is receding or being pushed back. When you're painting something a lighter color, that implies that the object is coming forward. Kind of like when you're painting a face on a figure. When you paint the planes of a face in a lighter color, that brings, let's say, the nose or the bridge of the forehead forward. And if you're painting it a darker tone, that will push something like the jaw or underneath the chin backwards. So it's just kind of an illusion, and that's all you're really trying to create here. Once the oil has had time to evaporate and dry a bit, I like to go in with a damp rag moistened in mineral spirits and remove some of the paint off the higher edges. That'll bring back some of the light and life back into the piece. Here I want to create transition from light to dark. And by adding a darker cast shadow on the edge, that's going to give the impression of the back end of the stone being darker than the front edge. These stones are cubes or squares, and you should treat them the same way you would if you were doing a drawing of one. Most objects are a series of cones, squares, cylinders, or circles. Anyway, that's the way I look at them. And by thinking of them that way, I get a much better idea of how to paint that surface. If you Google search how to paint a cylinder, circle, or square, you can find all sorts of really good images that will help you to understand that theory. You can really see here by painting that dark line in between the stones how it emphasizes the illusion of depth. And here we go again, yet another layer of dry brushing. I'm using a much bigger, wider brush for this part because I'm trying to create that abrasive look of stone or stone that's been chipped. I'm also being a little more aggressive with the technique here, as I really want to create the illusion of aged stone. Also take note how I'm moving the brush with the light source. Even though two sides of these stone pillars are in almost complete shadow, you still need to add a little bit of light or they'll just look flat and uninteresting. Now I'm concentrating mainly on the edges, trying to give them a real weathered look. As great as the dry brushing technique is, you probably still need to go in after and add some hand-painted details such as individual stones or different marks on the stones themselves. It really helps add a lot of contrast and interest to the final piece. This is the stage where you really can go crazy and have a lot of fun here. And I wouldn't get too hung up on thinking that you're overdoing it, because you can always tone things down later with more washes and filters. We are dealing with fantasy here, so I really don't think you can go wrong. I've switched to a smaller, stiffer brush. By doing this, it allows me to be more precise with how I'm weathering each one of these stones. More detail painting is added here, emphasizing especially on the areas that are getting the most light. Did I mention dry brushing at all before? Yep, it's time for a little more of that dry, toasty goodness. This is probably my favorite oil paint of all time. It's so versatile and it really goes with any type of color. It's a great weathering paint and it really looks good on pretty much any surface you put it on. I'm doing the same thing here as before, just removing some of that dried pigment off the top of all the stonework. Like I said previously, you really can't ruin anything when you paint it, because you can always subdue the area with a filter or a glaze later if you feel that it's a little too much. I decided it needed a little more of that sunny feel, so I'm adding a little more cadmium yellow here as a wash just to warm things up and create that illusion of sunlight. Creating the illusion of a cast shadow isn't an easy task. Here's where having those reference photos really comes in handy. I tried my best to follow them as closely as I could, creating the light and the shadow and giving the illusion that light is falling over top of the surface from where the goblin and rider are situated. Creating this effect successfully really comes down to having proper photographs that are realistic enough to show you where to place them. Once you have that, it's just a matter of observation and patience. It's really a matter of trial and error, and well, I hope I pulled it off. Let me know in the comments below. Did I pull it off, or did I totally f the pooch? I suppose that's what makes this hobby so much fun. You just never know until you try, right? Well, there it is. I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe learned a few things along the way, and if not, you were mildly entertained. Fantasy isn't something I normally would have done in the past, but considering I really enjoyed this project, and I'm definitely looking at more fantasy projects in the future. If you want to see how I painted the goblin and rider, I made a whole video on that, and that'll be linked at the end of this video. Good luck with all your future projects, and I'll see you next time. If you dig what I do here, please consider subscribing. And while you're at it, hit the like button. It really does mean a lot to me and the algorithm gods. And you know you gotta keep those gods happy.